It's only been 2 short years since the original Azure Striker Gunvolt made a name for itself in the already well-trodden landscape of 2D action platformers on the Nintendo 3DS. You can't keep a good adept down though, and now the eponymous hero is ready for his sophomore outing in Azure Striker Gunvolt 2, and this time he's brought his rival from the first game, Copen, along for the ride as a second playable character. The result is a sequel that's just as fun, flashy, and hardcore as the original, if somewhat shorter and less focused. Gunvolt 2 takes place in a near-future world ravaged by the divide between humans and adepts, the term coined for a small subset of people who have developed what are known as septimal powers. These powers manifest in different ways from adept to adept, but generally they look like your standard superhuman abilities: energy manipulation, flight, psychic abilities, elemental powers, and so forth. For the uninitiated, Azure Striker Gunvolt derives its name from the hero, Gunvolt, whose Septima, called Azure Striker, allows him to freely control and manipulate electricity, making him one of the most powerful and feared adepts on record. The story picks up shortly after the events of the first game, in which Gunvolt took down the nefarious Sumeragi group in an effort to halt their Diva project, which sought to control all adepts around the world using the septimal power of an adept called Lumen, also known as the Muse, and you know what? The characters constantly throw around a lot of fancy anime-ish terminology, and you just kinda have to shrug your shoulders and roll with it, especially if you've never played the first game or haven't played it recently. Gunvolt 2's positioning as a direct sequel means there's quite a bit of rewarding payoff for those who are intimately familiar with the events of Gunvolt 1, but heaven help you if you haven't played the first game at all or played it long enough ago that you've forgotten the specifics, as Gunvolt 2 makes almost no effort to get players up to speed. The important thing to know for Gunvolt 2 is that there's a new group of adept terrorists called Eden who want to wipe out all those pesky humans and create a new world solely for those with septimal powers. Naturally, it's up to Gunvolt and Copen to stop them while also trying to kill each other in the way that anime rivals typically do. While an optional story refresher, even just a few paragraphs, would have been welcome, you'll be hard-pressed to care once the action gets going. The first game's unique, highly technical approach to 2D action platforming returns in full force here, meaning Gunvolt 2 isn't just about running, jumping, and shooting. Actually, Gunvolt doesn't really shoot enemies at all. He fires bullets, sure, but those bullets do very little damage in and of themselves. Instead, Gunvolt's bullets tag any enemies they hit, which then renders them vulnerable to Gunvolt's main attack, a screen-filling surge of electricity called the Flash Field. The Flash Field damages any tagged enemies for as long as it's active, regardless of where Gunvolt is on the screen in relation to those enemies, and it also allows Gunvolt to hover for a short time. This makes the Flash Field a vital tool for both offense and mobility, but as powerful as it is, it can't be used infinitely. All of Gunvolt's septimal abilities, including the Flash Field, consume EP. You can recharge EP at any time by tapping down twice on the D-pad, but if you run out of EP, Gunvolt will temporarily overheat and be unable to use any septimal abilities, leaving him vulnerable for a few seconds, and a few seconds can make all the difference in the midst of a tough boss battle. It quickly becomes evident then that on-the-fly EP management is just as vital to success as slick platforming skills. But managing your EP becomes much harder when you factor in Prevasion, Gunvolt's other main septimal ability, which enables Gunvolt to automatically dodge any attack that would have otherwise damaged him, as long as he has enough EP to consume. If he doesn't, he'll take damage as normal and overheat, leaving him susceptible to further damage while his EP recharges. The process of tagging enemies and then taking them out with the Flash Field quickly becomes second nature and never gets old simply because it always looks and feels so impressive and powerful. Once you get into a groove of dashing and jumping around, tagging enemies, deploying the Flash Field, and manually recharging your EP, the game starts to feel and look sublime in a way that few, if any, modern 2D platformers do, and this is the game's greatest strength. When the going gets really tough, Gunvolt can also unleash special skills. Some of these are flashy, over-the-top attacks that obliterate everything on screen, while others have recovery or support effects like restoring Gunvolt's HP or instantly recovering from overheating. Special skills consume SP instead of EP and must be used sparingly. SP recovers slowly to begin with, and each ability also has to go through a cooldown period before it can be used again. For better and worse, Copen plays completely differently from Gunvolt. As a plain old human, Copen doesn't have any septimal powers, but he makes up for that with his special jacket and high-tech weaponry, which enable him to air dash around stages and unleash all kinds of destruction upon his enemies. Without the Flash Field to rely on, Copen's gameplay revolves around his ability to lock onto an enemy by dashing into them. Any enemy you dash into in this manner then becomes vulnerable to the myriad weapons in Copen's arsenal, which grows with every boss you defeat in a manner similar to classic Mega Man. Copen can only lock onto one enemy at a time, however, while Gunvolt can tag several. Copen's gameplay is technical in a different way from Gunvolt's in that it's mainly about air dashing from enemy to enemy and racking up as many kills as you can before you touch the ground. Copen's air dashing is regulated by his remaining bullets, and like Gunvolt's EP, they can be reloaded at any time, but Copen will lose the ability to air dash altogether if he runs out of bullets. Copen can also use his own form of prevasion, which consumes 1 bullet for each attack dodged. Finally, Copen has 2 special skills that are regulated by cooldown time, but they're limited to a healing ability and a single full-screen attack. Unlike Gunvolt, he never learns any new special skills. I certainly can't knock the game for offering up a second character that plays completely differently from Gunvolt, but the straight truth is that even once I got over Copen's initial learning curve and figured out the rhythm of his gameplay, I never found him even half as fun to play as Gunvolt. There's a certain flow to Gunvolt's movements and actions that makes him look and feel much slicker compared to Copen's stickier, more methodical approach. It also doesn't help that as a character, Copen is kind of an insufferable prick who is almost impossible to like, let alone root for, especially compared to Gunvolt, who remains an eminently likable hero throughout despite his cheesy edginess. Unfortunately, Gunvolt 2's dual character setup has also resulted in both characters getting less time to shine and fewer stages to play through overall. Whereas the first game lasted around 8 hours and featured a dozen or so missions for Gunvolt alone, this time around Gunvolt and Copen each get 10 or less stages, with 4 of those stages shared between both campaigns and one of them nothing more than a quick boss battle. Ultimately, this means each character's story can be finished in a scant 3 or 4 hours, maybe less, and even in that limited amount of playtime you're going to be seeing a few repeat stages. This results in Gunvolt 2 coming off as significantly narrower in scope than its predecessor, and left me with a pervasive feeling that both character stories were over far too quickly. One thing is for sure though, whoever you play as, you're in for some of the most buttery smooth controls this side of Mega Man. As a matter of fact, Gunvolt developer Inti are also the ones responsible for bringing us the Mega Man Zero and ZX series, and that lofty pedigree is evident in the way Gunvolt 2 feels as you're playing it. Not only are the controls spot on, but the physics for standard actions like dashing, jumping, and wall kicking almost make Gunvolt 2 come off like you're playing a long-lost Zero or ZX game for the 3DS, which is a wonderful thing. Just like in the first game, you can synthesize new equipment for Gunvolt and Copen using materials won from completing stages and challenges. And also just like the first game, you can almost entirely ignore synthesizing if you wish. A standard playthrough never affords you enough materials to make anything that great, and both character stories can easily be completed without the beneficial effects of better equipment. Synthesis really only plays a major role if you intend to try and 100% the game by completing every challenge, and I would have preferred to see the material requirements balanced a bit better for the main quest. Speaking of challenges, they do indeed return from Gunvolt 1 and are slightly improved here, but their implementation is still disappointingly backwards. While you no longer have to select specific challenges to attempt and are therefore not limited in the number of challenges you can complete in one go, they still don't stack. Which means if you finish a stage with an S rank but haven't completed the challenge for finishing it with a B rank, you'll only get credit for the B rank challenge and have to try again for each successive rank. This seems like such an obvious design oversight that I feel it very well could have been intentional, and if so, then it comes off to me as a cheap way to pad out the challenges and make them take even longer to complete. You high score chasers out there will likely be able to finish many of the easier challenges without breaking a sweat, but cracking the tougher challenges requires learning the ins and outs of Gunvolt 2's unique Kudos scoring system, whereby you earn more Kudos and thus a higher score multiplier the more enemies you defeat. But Kudos are only cashed in upon reaching checkpoints or using a special skill, and if you get hit too many times before one of those things happens, you lose all your accumulated Kudos and you can kiss that S rank goodbye. None of this matters if you're only here for the story, but considering how short that is, the vast majority of Gunvolt 2's replay value lies in going for high ranks and completing challenges. While neither character's story is particularly difficult to finish and Gunvolt 2 feels a little easier and more forgiving than the first game overall, there's still some steep challenge here for those less skilled at platformers. Fortunately, both Gunvolt and Copen continuously gain experience and level up as they defeat enemies, which increases their HP and ensures that with enough grinding, even the most bumbling players can brute force their way to the end. Gunvolt also learns new special skills at specific levels, while Copen gains memory expansions for his jacket, which can be used to install more beneficial effects. RPG elements like experience and leveling up are a curious inclusion in a platformer, but they're implemented smartly here, and Gunvolt 2 is undoubtedly richer for them. Gunvolt 2's story mainly plays out via subtitled Japanese dialogue that happens in the middle of gameplay, which is fun the first time through each stage as it adds to the drama of everything happening on screen and pulls you into the story. Despite a few major typos here and there, the English localization is really sharp and a pleasure to read. Even the bosses, who barely get enough screen time to establish anything beyond general character traits, have dialogue that is consistently punchy and entertaining to read. The dialogue can sometimes be kind of distracting as it competes with the gameplay for the 3DS's limited screen real estate, but fortunately all dialogue can be turned off on subsequent runs through any stage, which is a smart feature. While Gunvolt 2's soundtrack is unfortunately quite forgettable, much like the first game's music actually, it at least does a sufficient job of complementing the on-screen action without making a nuisance of itself. On the other hand, the sound effects really pop, and the Japanese voice acting is wonderfully over the top and dramatic, which is perfect for a game that often looks, sounds, and feels like a popular shonen anime. Graphically, Gunvolt 2 looks practically identical to its predecessor, and that's a huge compliment. The Gunvolt series sports some of the most stylish, polished 2D sprite art and animation I've yet seen on any platform, period, and the game is just a visual feast from top to bottom. The character designs also remain strong, while the stages and their settings, which were generally kind of forgettable in the first game, are at least a little more memorable and visually distinct this time around. Meanwhile, playing with the stereoscopic 3D on really makes some of the visual effects pop in a pleasant way, but you're also not missing out on too much if you keep it off. Finally, Gunvolt 2 features some decidedly cool Amiibo support in the form of a cameo appearance by the one and only Shovel Knight. Simply tap a Shovel Knight amiibo when prompted and you'll be whisked away to a brutally tough boss fight with the Blue Burrower himself. I'm not kidding about it being tough either. Both Gunvolt and Copen are locked at level 1 for this battle, so no matter who you play as, all those levels gained during the main game won't help you against Shovel Knight. It's a fun, neat little addition if you have access to a Shovel Knight amiibo, but hardly essential and completely inoffensive if you don't. No other amiibo are compatible with Gunvolt 2, by the way. At the end of the day, while I like Azure Striker Gunvolt 2 quite a bit, I also feel that it comes up a bit short compared to the first game. They're more or less comparable in most aspects, with the sequel fixing a couple of the first game's minor problems while managing not to fix some of its bigger ones, such as the way challenges are handled. While the addition of Copen as a second playable character is a good thing in that it offers a completely different way of playing the game alongside a second story to enjoy, the sacrifice made to the game's overall length and number of stages is painfully evident no matter which character you prefer. Still, Gunvolt 2 is an easy recommendation for any fan of 2D action platformers. The blue bomber many of us grew up with might be in hiatus for the time being, but the Azure Striker has arrived to carry the torch, and he does so admirably. As always, thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this review, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. You can also find links to our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages in the video description below. Otherwise, keep it on GameXplain for more on Azure Striker Gunvolt 2 and all things gaming.